After the success of the 21st Tenkaichi tournament arc, Toriyama had to figure out what he was going to do next with Dragon Ball, and he looked to inspiration from the many video games he'd played for this next arc, particularly beat-em-up games if I recall correctly. And that does check out when you watch the arc. This arc feels like a natural evolution of the prior two story arcs, or better yet, a marriage between the two, combining the action of the tournament arc with the adventure of the Hunt for the Dragon Balls arc. But don't get me twisted, this still is a comedic gag manga, at least for now. However, excuse me for a moment, I kinda want to do something a little different for my analysis of this arc in particular, and for that I'm going to have to go just a bit off topic. So if you'll indulge me real quick. It's been a recurring joke within the Dragon Ball community that Dragon Ball fans don't actually watch or read the series. I can't confirm if this is actually true or not, but talking to your average Dragon Ball fan sure does give me the impression it is. Unfortunately, however, I don't really have much room to speak. I myself never really went through Dragon Ball in its entirety. As a kid, I watched most of the Android saga through Kai when it was airing on Nicktoons. I remember catching most of the latter episodes of GT when they aired in 2012 as well, but otherwise I never really had the opportunity to watch all of any of the series except for Super, which I made a point to watch weekly when new episodes dropped. Most of my knowledge of Dragon Ball's story prior to reading the Z manga in 2015 or 16, I don't remember when, came from three places: the video games, plot summaries, and YouTube videos. On the note of YouTube videos, having grown up in the 2010s, it shouldn't really be a surprise to anyone that a lot of my Dragon Ball opinions back in the day came from Dragon Ball YouTubers I watched. Sure, I held a lot of uncommon, unpopular opinions. Kai was better than Z, Dub sucked, Dragon Ball was better than DBZ even though I hadn't seen either. But if there was a Dragon Ball tuber that shared that opinion, all of my reasons would be based upon theirs. Maybe this was less common than I thought, but one I do remember hearing from time to time was that the best arc in the first half of the Dragon Ball manga, and even including Z sometimes, was the Red Ribbon arc. Two YouTubers in particular I remember having this opinion were Mr. Fusion and Totally Not Mark. Hearing this a lot shaped my outlook on Dragon Ball, and prior to going through this arc myself, I assumed I'd probably come away with the same opinions. It's not like these two were saying this for no reason. The arc had a wide variety of events take place, some incredible emotional moments, and a great thematic element to it that was unique to this arc. For the first time in this analysis video, I'm gonna show my hand right away. I do not like this arc that much. It's personally not as good as Dragon Ball YouTube made it sound. Shock of all shocks, maybe I shouldn't get my opinions from fucking anime YouTubers anymore. A lesson I should have learned after watching Bleach. So, I suppose I do raise the question by saying everything I just said. What's so wrong with the Red Ribbon Army arc? What has it done to receive my ire? Is it a confusingly written mess that stumbles to do anything meaningful without losing me? Is it a plot hole-ridden mess that can't go a single plot point without contradicting information it itself set up? Is it just a stupid narrative that is not worth getting invested in? Well, I'll start with this. It's not all bad. I think in terms of comedy, while overall a step down from the already only a decent step up from the middle-of-the-road humor from the first arc, it's pretty amusing. Goku getting lost in the big city, assuming that girls in dirty magazines are too poor for clothing, anything involving Ninja Murasaki, and the many creative ways Tao Pai Pai manages to kill people. This arc is about the level of quality I've come to expect from Dragon Ball in that area so far. In fact, I'd say with the exception of a singular character whose whole existence feels like a poignant attempt to make the most poorly aged character in the history of the anime, this arc isn't really in your face with anything I think modern audiences would find gross. On the other hand, this is far and away the most ambitious storyline yet. It follows Goku, who in pursuit of the Dragon Ball that used to belong to his grandfather Gohan, which, he lost when the Dragon Ball scattered at the end of the first arc, he ends up butting heads with the military organization known as the Red Ribbon Army. A colorfully coded group of military guys and weirdos alike, so, like the US military. In terms of genre, I feel Toriyama has added a lot more action-adventure elements to this story arc, though, it is still very much comedic. The antagonists are played for laughs, and like the peel-off squad before them, the whole deal with them is not overcoming the obstacles they put up, but the various funny ways Goku just steps over those obstacles. These guys are fucking embarrassing, it's hilarious. Despite the lightheartedness, however, this arc does feel like it has the largest stakes, and at times takes itself the most seriously of all the arcs we've had so far. In fact, this is the first arc of Dragon Ball where we have an on-screen death, at least one that's taken incredibly seriously. When I tell you this was highly ambitious, I mean it. This arc is usually split into 4 distinct sections, each about as long as both of the prior arcs, and put together it makes by far the longest arc of the original Dragon Ball. Ignoring how the first arc started at the very end of 84, this is the first arc to have spanned multiple years, having started in 85 and ended it in 87. So with all of this in mind, what does the Red Ribbon Army arc do so wrong that it earned my ire? Well, ambition is commendable, but you could definitely tell Toriyama was not used to telling this type of story and wasn't entirely sure how to fuse the comedy and the new action-adventure elements. I think this arc gets by thanks to a number of memorable set pieces and character interactions, but at the same time, struggles in the department of, well, not boring me to death at times. Dragon Ball in this transition unfortunately lost one of its biggest strengths, its quick pacing. A big part of what made each segment of Dragon Ball work was that if I wasn't feeling something, it would generally be over pretty quickly. Like the fights in the tournament arc or the, episodes in the Hunt for the Dragon Balls arc that focus on a specific town or whatever. That's no more. Think of these 4.5 segments of the Red Ribbon arc as 4 episodes of the first arc, but each episode is stretched out across about 11 or so episodes. That's what this feels like. And while I'd make the argument that this arc does deserve to have each segment be long, I mean, it'd be dumber for them to only be 1 or 2 episodes, I do feel like that aside from the many major heavy-hitting moments that happen every couple episodes, I just could not stay interested in this arc. I mean, for one, as I'll talk about when we get to the next arc, I fucking love the cast of Dragon Ball, primarily the squad that's formed after the prior 2 arcs of Goku, Bulma, Yamcha, Launch, and Krillin, and I guess Poir too, but nobody fucking cares about them. For most of this arc, it's just Goku, and when Krillin and Bulma do show up, it's gotta be their least interesting, most annoying characterizations. They have their moments, but they were probably the least well written in this arc, hardly funny and hardly interesting. There is one exception, a filler episode where the characters go to an amusement park. It's so clearly filler and doesn't mean anything, but I have to admit, I thought it was pretty fun. I don't know why the Toei writers had Goku pull his pants down and show his balls. That was kinda weird, even if the joke of him assuming the Red Ribbon hired bounty hunter assuming she wanted to see his balls when she actually meant the Dragon Balls was kinda funny. This whole segment was a surprising joy and reminded me not to underestimate the strength of the OG squad of Oolong, Poir, and Yamcha, Bulma. The latter episodes of this arc during the Fortune Teller Baba part also have some good character interactions between our squad, but it's also so boring. I don't want to blow my load yet, so I'll wait before I discuss the specific segments of this story, but the story just not engaging me or not being able to hold my attention is a constant. Toriyama wasn't quite there yet when it came to being able to craft an engaging long-term narrative. A big part of doing that is making the audience care about what they're seeing. And I mean, he gets that down during the 3rd segment of the arc, and I mean, the first major segment does a decent job, but you have to understand, even if action and adventure is the direction Toriyama has been taking the story in, this story is still first and foremost a comedy. These segments are set up with the intention of simultaneously getting laughs out of the audience, and I think overall this mixed focus just stretches Dragon Ball thin. The comedy is as good as it's always been, which is decent, but it's not enough to really carry Dragon Ball for me, especially not in a scenario where it ends up feeling dragged out because of the larger episode count and the shift in focus of narrative priorities. Then on top of that, you also have the action-adventure stuff, which while interesting on paper, in practice is just not that interesting. Toriyama is at a point where he doesn't really know how to make it all work. And it doesn't help that, as I mentioned earlier, we're lacking that main squad of characters that Toriyama really spent a lot of time building up in favor of newer characters who kind of just serve the purpose of being tools to progress the narrative, like Upa, Bora, Sunol, and her family. I do think Upa and Bora kind of managed to weasel their way out of this hole thanks to a little screen time he got in the Fortune Teller Baba arc, but I'm not about to act like he's in my top 10 favorite characters right now. And that's saying a lot because, like, who's even in my top 10? Goku? Launch? Krillin? Master Roshi? Bulma? And Yamcha? And then everyone else? Look, I don't love these guys. Even if seeing Upa return in DBZ was kinda cool, and I wouldn't mind seeing an adult Suno, because I do kinda find her friendship with Goku decently wholesome and pretty different from the dynamic we see with him in other characters, so bleh. I'm just gonna hop to what should be my conclusion statements. As much good as I think this arc has in its emotional weight, especially towards the end, and also in its thematic strength, this arc is maybe like a quarter fun to sit through. The rest is so agonizingly boring, and that's not to mention many of the what should be its best moments feeling rushed through and haphazardly put together. I'm gonna get to that death scene I mentioned earlier later, you'll see what I mean. So anyways, I'm gonna try to delve into the individual segments of the Red Ribbon arc. It can be split 4 ways. Generally, they are referred to as the Red Ribbon Saga, the General Blue Saga, the Commander Red Saga, and then the Fortune Teller Baba Saga, which is often considered to be its own story arc, but since it's meant to wrap up all of the loose ends of the Red Ribbon stuff, I like to consider it a part of that arc. And I grew up watching Mr. Fusion, so there's some bias in there. Personally, these arc names are kinda shit. The Red Ribbon Army Saga is fine, as it's our introduction to the army itself, but since most of the arc focuses on Goku's escapades in the Muscle Tower, I'll call it the Muscle Tower arc. The General Blue Saga is fine since the arc is about dealing with, General Blue, but I'll call it the Treasure Hunt Saga because it's about the squad hunting for treasure. Commander Red, while the greater scope villain of the arc, most of the Commander Red saga is about Tao Pai Pai, or Mercenary Tao, so we'll call it the Tao Pai Pai arc. The Fortune Teller Baba saga can keep its name, it's fine. But it is worth mentioning that I did claim that there are 4.5 segments, not just 4. See, the Red Ribbon Army arc, at least in the anime, begins with a filler arc focusing on the return of the Pilaf gang and the shenanigans ensue when they get involved with the Ox King and his daughter, Chi-Chi. The Ox King and his daughter Chi-Chi were a major part of a tiny mini arc from the Hunt from the Dragon Balls arc, where the main characters tried to get into the Ox King's castle. Goku ended up crossing paths with his daughter, and the two have, what appeared to be at the time, seemingly insignificant interactions, but a notable one included Chi-Chi asking Goku to marry her in the future, to which Goku agrees, though under the impression a bride is some sort of food. And before you say anything about that being true, she's 12. Yes, in spite of the design. I'm surprised I didn't actually mention this mini arc at all. Not for Chi-Chi or Ox King, who wouldn't really become a big deal until much later in this narrative, but because of the sheer amount of lore it added to the story all of a sudden. We'd already known Goku had a grandpa named Gohan, but we learned that the Ox King and Gohan were both students of Master Roshi. And this arc was also where we see Roshi reveal his true strength for the first time, strength he showcases by firing the very first Kamehameha wave, and we also see Goku's first Kamehameha too. In fact, I haven't really said anything about Goku's grandfather at all, whose keepsake was the 4-star ball, which Bulma wanted so badly she tried to seduce my boy over. Mind you, the whole reason she coerced Goku into joining him in the first place was because she couldn't get the ball off of him. I'm surprised I didn't mention that either. Okay, I'm getting off topic here. Toei brings back the Ox King and Chi-Chi for some good old filler episodes that primarily focus on the antics of the Pilaf gang, the hunt for the first Dragon Ball, and some glimpses into what becomes our first major foe from the Red Ribbon Army, this being the highly competent big muscle boy Colonel Silver. The filler arc spends a lot of time showcasing just how badass he is. Unfortunately, it turns out all of the scenes of him being badass were also filler, so all of that build-up is simply used as a joke to show how much stronger Goku is than him, with the punchline being him getting kicked in the gut after everything is all said and done and never showing up again. You might have noticed I skimmed this one, and that's because I didn't really stick around for the filler episodes. Even if these ones are built into the main story, I just wasn't interested. I hope you forgive me for that one. But once out of this opening segment, that's when the Red Ribbon Army arc really begins properly. The Muscle Tower arc is pretty okay for the most part. Goku scales the titular Muscle Tower after being made aware that the Red Ribbon Army is using it as a base to terrorize a local village and forcing the villagers to help them find the Dragon Ball in the area. They also have the mayor hostage, and so Goku takes it upon himself to free the mayor and rescue the village from their tyranny. So yeah, Dragon Ball is still a comedy. Action and adventure elements are now present, but it's still mostly comedy, and this arc kind of showcases that a lot. I think the highlight of this segment, and honestly the arc as a whole, is Goku's battle, quote-unquote, with Ninja Murasaki. A lot of the comedy of this whole arc is based on Goku's bouncing off the antagonists. Colonel Silver and General White, for example, are both incredibly serious guys who have to put up with the unseriousness of Goku. And the humor from that is fine, but with Murasaki, what you get is the equivalent to what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. Just two dumbasses bouncing off of each other, with genuinely some of the funniest jokes in the whole show. The big highlight for me was Murasaki trying to attack Goku from above, and Goku responding simply by putting his Dyoibo down, causing Murasaki to land on it asshole first, resulting in this glorious moment. Another funny moment is when Murasaki tries hiding, but Goku discovers that he's very obviously hiding at the bottom of a pond, so Goku grabs a teapot and pours the contents down his breathing tube. Or Murasaki hiding from Goku, only for Goku to discover him so obviously hiding behind an American flag for some reason. Like, America isn't real in this world. What's Toei trying to say by doing this? This entire fight is comedy gold. Like, straight up the funniest shit in the show so far. Like, I was laughing my ass off the entire time I was watching this, which, mind you, has never happened so consistently in the show. Stands in very stark contrast to the rest of the Muscle Tower arc, which by comparison is just aight. Goku's friendship with Suno, which is primarily explored in the filler episode towards the end of the arc, was interesting. We're introduced to this gentle giant of a Frankenstein's monster known as Android 8, who despite being literally programmed to fight people, refuses to do so. When Murasaki tries to force him to fight by threatening to use a bomb that was programmed inside of him, Goku instantly stops fucking around and gives this iconic, lovely glare at him. After beating up Murasaki, Goku and 8 join forces to get through the rest of the tower, and a lot of the rest of the arc is just showcasing their dynamic. Aider is a real wholesome guy, but I can't say that I cared that much about his relationship with Goku, nor can I say that I cared too much about the things that went down in the tower after this. The whole fight between Goku and Silver was interesting. Him shooting Goku in the head was wild. It got 8 mad enough to beat the shit out of Silver, which was kinda neat. Otherwise, I've got nothing else to say about the Muscle Tower arc. It's an interesting segment, but I was honestly going through the motions with this one. Unless it involved Ninja Murasaki, this arc wasn't all that funny, and there weren't that many memorable moments either. It wasn't bad, but it didn't really do much for me. I did enjoy the dynamic between Goku and Sinnoh, but unfortunately there wasn't much of that. Android 8 was cool, but I wasn't too into him, especially not compared to his younger siblings, who would be introduced in Z, but we'll get there when we get there. Anyways, once that's done, Goku ends up reconvening with Bulma in order to get his Dragon Radar fixed up. He ends up in the city, and admittedly the shenanigans Goku gets up to here are pretty funny, like fighting Bruce Lee and utterly humiliating the poor guy. He gives a girl a huge sum of money just for telling him where to go because a taxi driver told him he needed money for services. And while I do find Bulma developing into such a really annoying selfish jerk and a huge dick towards Yamcha to be a little frustrating, I do admit some bits here got a chuckle out of me. Like Yamcha having a bunch of fangirls who chill outside of Bulma's house, which pisses her off. Oh yeah, Bulma's the daughter of the creator of these Hoi Poi capsules that we've been seeing throughout the series. They're items that allow you to put anything inside these tiny little capsules. I haven't mentioned them since they're not that plot relevant, or at least relevant enough to what I'm talking about, but I think they're a little bit of neat world building. This segment of the story in the anime is also where Husky tries to steal Goku's Dragon Balls, and an admittedly funny set of episodes, or episode singular, I don't remember, that got a couple chuckles out of me. And I've kinda got to admit it, I think Husky's kinda cute. I like her, wish she was canon. Anyways, Goku beats her using the magical power of tickling, by the way, I just find that interesting. Anyways, once that bit of filler is done, the squad convenes at Roshi's house, and Krillin and Bulma suggest they go on a bit of a treasure hunt. I find it super amusing that Krillin of all people is the one setting this into motion, for no other reason than the fact that Krillin has the same voice actress as Luffy in Japanese. Is Krillin secretly the Pirate King? Who knows? Anyways, I think that of all the arcs of the Red Ribbon arc that suffer from boring me, this is the one that really suffers the most. In fact, I got so fed up watching the anime version, I actually briefly dropped it altogether and started reading the manga hoping it would make it much easier. It didn't. At least Toriyama's art is as good as always. The beginning section is honestly a blur, with the sole exception of a scene where Bulma gets cornered by some Red Ribbon Army thugs who ask if she wants to have some fun, quote unquote. Bulma is initially all for it, but realizes pretty quickly these guys are thinking about doing something unsavory to her. She raises a couple questions just to make sure, and then caps it off with the quote, "Oh, you wouldn't mean something really perverted that we can't do in a gag manga for boys and girls, wouldn't you?" I'm not gonna say I laughed at that, but I thought it was kind of eyebrow-raising. Kind of a good, but also kind of a weird way, you know. I think it's interesting because it's, a fourth wall breaking joke, but we haven't had that many of those since I think the first arc. The main antagonist for this arc is General Blue, probably one of the most poorly aged, most problematic villains in the medium. Dude's design is clearly meant to evoke this image of the perfect Nazi Aryan soldier with blonde hair and blue eyes. And this is on top of him being a huge hodgepodge of gay stereotypes, from being incredibly feminine, germophobic, even pedophilic. Honestly, I'm not even mad. Personally, my beef with him is just that it's kind of not that funny. As I've been repeating, Dragon Ball at this point was still comedic, and a major part of that, outside of the tournament arc at least, has been the antagonist. We saw that with Murasaki and his antics with Goku, and we also saw that with Colonel Silver and, the guy at the Muscle Tower, whose whole dynamic with Goku was just Goku's idiocity playing off of their seriousness. General Blue is kind of just lame, personally. The only time this character I feel did anything remotely amusing was when Bulma started sipping towards him and he shoot him away out of fear. To which she responded, "Phooey, he must be gay," causing Krillin to respond, "I didn't know there were gay bad guys." Genuinely a funny dialogue exchange, though definitely a product of its time. Surprisingly though, this is already a toned down version of a different version of the same dialogue where Bulma straight up calls him a... yeah, It's a shame. I'm not inherently against this overly offensive walking 80s LGBT stereotype. I have no shame in admitting I found Ghost Stories' English dub funny, and that's the epitome of 2000s offensive American humor. And hey, I've even found things like South Park funny, which is not too dissimilar. So I'm not inherently against this kind of stuff. But General Blue isn't that. And sure, there's a whole 2 decades and an ocean separating these works, but still, my point is that in principle, General Blue shouldn't suck, he just kinda does, because the jokes he has hardly lands. And as an antagonist, I never really cared too much for him otherwise. I hardly saw him as a threat Goku couldn't handle, he never forced Goku to grow and change, and he just kind of existed. As a whole, this pirate section is just a whole lot of nothing in my opinion, and I honestly don't even remember too much from it. Anyways, the rest of the arc happens, and somehow while chasing General Blue by himself, the two end up in an entirely different manga. Goku and General Blue end up in Penguin Village, the setting of Dr. Slump, Toriyama's previous manga. I find that really fascinating. I wonder what compelled Toriyama to briefly cross the two shows over. Also, I find it very interesting how in the anime version, it's pretty clear that General Blue and Goku went so fast during their chase scene that they both managed to cross into the Dr. Slump dimension, but from what I read of the manga, it appears they just ended up there, heavily implying, if not confirming, that Dr. Slump and Dragon Ball take place in the same world. Dragon Ball Super certainly acts like this is the case, though that raises a lot of questions about, given how serious Dragon Ball becomes as the manga progresses, what the Penguin Village guys are doing about, you know, that stuff. Like when Cell's gonna blow up the Earth, or when Majin Buu kills everyone on Earth. It's like these develop into such opposing worlds, it's hard to me imagine they're in the same reality. Anyways, by far the best mini-arc of the Red Ribbon story arc is the Korin's Tower one. It's the first in the saga to do, well, a couple things. For one, it's the first time we have a really good end goal. Muscle Tower's main end goal of saving the mayor was one that felt out of focus as the mayor is such a minor background guy with no character. He's basically a narrative tool, so I hardly cared about the goal, plus Toriyama is more interested in showcasing the various action and comedic set pieces in the arc instead. On the other end, there honestly is no interesting end goal for the treasure hunting mini-arc aside from the possibility that the group might find treasure. Like, I'd be excited for the rich getting even richer. Moving on. So really, this segment could have done the bare minimum, and it still probably would have been better than anything that came before it. So Toriyama said fuck it. Goku was unfortunately incapable of taking down General Blue, but in his place comes Tao Pai Pai, a mercenary the Red Ribbon hires to find the remaining Dragon Balls and most importantly, take care of Goku for them, as at this rate, they recognize that Goku has become too big of a threat for them to handle. This leads us into the second to last section of the arc, and the final section of the Red Ribbon arc proper, the Karin's Tower segment. The Red Ribbon Army is searching for the Dragon Ball in this area surrounding this tower, which is guarded by an indigenous man named Bora and his little son, Upa. While Bora is strong enough to soundly defeat them by himself, when Upa gets kidnapped and is used as blackmail, Goku arrives just in time to save them. Turns out, the Dragon Ball the indigenous duo is protecting just happens to be the one Goku was looking for, the 4-star ball. Given Goku just saved them in his son's life, Bora has no issue handing it over to Goku, and after this, Bora and his son quickly end up forming a very endearing bond with Goku. Unfortunately, right as they do, Tao Pai Pai drops by. Now the thing about Tao Pai Pai is that he isn't quite like the other antagonists we've seen up to this point. There's a very notable lack of comedy that comes with this character. Not to say that he isn't prone to creating moments of humor, but they often come from the utterly insane ways he finds to kill people, such as murdering General Blue by lobotomizing him using his tongue. The entire point of this character isn't to be some guy that Goku can bounce off of the same way prior goofy antagonists were, and this is made abundantly clear in their first encounter. I have long since been familiar with the plot of Dragon Ball. After all, I spent years combing through different plot summaries, watching YouTubers do retrospectives on the story, and of course, I played through pretty much all of Revenge of King Piccolo as a kid. I don't doubt part of the reason I remembered Tao Pai Pai's name, I mean, it was Mercenary Town in the game, but details, is because he was one of the most challenging bosses in that game. At least, you know, to a 7-year-old me. I always knew the story went that Goku loses his first fight with Tao Pai Pai and comes back stronger than before in their second fight. But somehow seeing Goku lose this fight, and not just lose, but get absolutely washed, caught me off guard as if this was my first time seeing this story play out. Goku has lost fights before, but in the few cases this has happened, he was either held back by outside circumstances such as hunger, or he just barely failed to win, such as the case in the fight with Jackie Chun. Otherwise, Goku has been a one-man army, taking down pretty much every opponent he has ever been matched up against with little trouble, especially in this arc where he's easily obliterated huge swaths of Red Ribbon soldiers, cutting through them like he was slicing bread. Sure, he might get put in a position where he'll struggle just a bit, but not only does he come out of the other side looking stronger than ever, situations like that are incredibly rare for the character, who otherwise rarely struggles. So when Tao Pai Pai pulls up and not only defeats, but completely embarrasses Goku, dude, it's completely fucking shocking. Tao Pai Pai does not give Goku an inch. All of his attacks are effortlessly dodged and countered with some insanely devastating attacks. And he's so disrespectful too. Like, one of the first hits he lands on Goku is when he just turns his head and swipes him out of the sky with his fucking ponytail of all things. He's got Goku crawling over the floor, desperately trying to fuck with his footing, and look at this, bro's tap dancing on this little nigga. Like, he could literally just step back, get away for his safety, but he chooses to fuck with him mentally, getting all up in his mind. He even steps on his foot so he can't get away. When Goku appears like he'll be mounting a huge comeback by firing the biggest Kamehameha he can muster, Tao Pai Pai just tanks the fucking thing and counters him with this one smaller energy beam known as the Dodonpa, which fucking obliterates Goku, and then he just fucking leaves. I mean, yeah, he takes Goku's bag of Dragon Balls with him as well, but goddamn, I still remember sitting there watching this, mouth wide open like this was my first time ever seeing this fight. Like, I don't think I'd ever seen an anime character get styled on this badly, no less Goku at this point in his career. It goes without saying, but it sets Pai Pai up to be seen as a formidable foe, the first real challenge for Goku. Even if Jackie Chun was a tough nut to crack, Goku hardly took that fight seriously. But with Pai Pai killing Appa's father right in front of him, Goku gets the most serious we've ever seen him, which sets a good precedent. Anyways, Tao Pai Pai fucks off with the balls, leaving poor Appa to bury both his father and the kid who tried to avenge him. Since his clothes are all messed up thanks to tanking the Kamehameha, Pai Pai doesn't plan on handing over the Dragon Balls until he's got his clothes back. Anyways, it turns out Goku miraculously survived. Turns out because he tucked the 4-star ball in his shirt, it managed to prevent him from taking as much damage as he would have otherwise. In a way, his grandfather, who that ball has come to represent, saved him. This is one of those things people who love this arc love to point out, as to why this arc is so compelling, and who am I to disagree? That's actually really fire storytelling. Upon waking up, Goku is greeted by the sight of Bora's grave, and it's heavy. This is the very first on-screen death in Dragon Ball, and it's shocking. Dragon Ball has been so playful and cheery, and here comes this random guy to completely toss over the table and do away with all of that. It's baffling to say the least. Hard dose of reality to really shake up the story. I will say though, the death scene definitely landed flat for me, at least in the anime. It's just that it's paced fucking terribly. Mind you, everything in between Tao Pai Pai showing up and the credits sequence beginning are 4 minutes. We're not given any time to have the weight of this moment dwell or anything. Bora dies, Appa starts mourning, Goku starts fighting. I don't know if this is Toei's fault or Toriyama's fault, but it definitely hurt this segment of the story for me. Thankfully, the fight between Goku and Tao Pai Pai does an excellent job getting across what it needs to. Goku is not yet good enough, and he needs to become stronger and fast. And also, Tao Pai Pai stands in a league of his own when it comes to Dragon Ball antagonists so far. As I've repeated so many times before, whereas the prior antagonists were meant to facilitate laughs from the audience, Tao Pai Pai is the first antagonist in the series who acts as a tool for Goku's development, both physically and mentally. But let's be honest, mostly physically. The rest of this arc details Goku's attempts to strengthen himself before his next confrontation with Tao Pai Pai, and the conflict with Tao Pai Pai itself, of course. This involves him climbing the titular tower and meeting this cat named after the titular tower. His method of training is scamming you into drinking his tap water. He claims that it'll make Goku stronger than ever, but when he actually does drink it, it does jack all. Really, the actual training was all the running around he forces Goku to do before he can actually drink it. See, the plan is, he claims the water is super useful, but Goku will have to pry it from his warm, cat-like paws first, which ends up being a very difficult task. Korin even points out that Roshi did this exact thing a couple 100 years ago, and it took him multiple years to get that water. Goku, being Goku, manages in 3 days, just in time to confront Tao Pai Pai and fucking obliterate him. And I'm not joking either, he literally fucking obliterates the guy. What can I say? This is a genuinely engaging mini-arc, a rarity at this point in the story, somehow. Anyways, Goku decides, fuck it, he's gonna raid the Red Ribbon headquarters so he can get his Dragon Balls back. Surprisingly, this information is something the squad is made aware of, as Bulma creates a "what is Goku doing at the moment" machine, and realizing what he's doing causes them to panic and attempt to join him, though clearly scared for their safety, but they're dedicated enough to Goku's safety that they want to help him out as best they can. Unsurprisingly though, it turns out he didn't need them. Goku just casually barges in and completely obliterates the place before finally coming face to face with the leader of the Red Ribbon Army. well, I guess I should say newly self-instated leader. Throughout the entire arc, the greater scope villain of the entire conflict was Commander Red, this short-tempered man whose job was mostly just to complain about how poorly everything was going and how incompetent everyone was. While he explained that the reason he was gathering the Dragon Balls was so the Red Ribbon Army could conquer the world initially, right before Goku arrives, he let slip that in actuality he wanted them so he could have his wish of being taller, be granted. Safe to say, Staff Officer Black, who recently had been the butt of Red's mistreatment, doesn't take this well and fucking kills the guy. Well, anyways, Goku arrives to fight Staff Officer Black. After some failed negotiations, the two start to fight, and it goes about as well as you'd expect. Eventually, Goku's able to kill the guy, and thus ends the conflict with the Red Ribbon Army. So you might think the arc is over, right? Well, actually, no. Goku convenes with the squad, who arrived too late to do anything of use. Upon doing so, he realizes that he's still missing a Dragon Ball, but it's also not showing up on his radar. Master Roshi suggests getting the help of Fortune Teller Baba to help them find this last Dragon Ball, as apparently she knows just about everything there is to know. So the squad goes out to find Baba to ask the question, only for her to reveal that asking Fortune Teller Baba a favor itself costs a fortune. But thankfully, they don't have to pay her $1 billion if they don't want to. Instead, they could fight her 5 mysterious fighters. So Goku and the rest of the squad, Krillin, Yamcha, Puar, and Upa, join forces to fight our mystery opponents. This is often squared into its own little story arc known as the Fortune Teller Baba arc, but given it's a direct continuation of the events of the Red Ribbon arc, and where all of its remaining plot threads are concluded, I and many others consider it to be a part of it as a bit of an epilogue. For the most part, this arc is a quick return to the style we saw in the 21st Tenkaichi Tournament arc, with the arc focusing on a series of comedic fights. Honestly, I don't think this mini arc is too bad. At least at first, I mean. The first 2 fights are actually pretty funny, returning us to the quality of the 21st Tenkaichi arc. Krillin's fight with Vampire Man is incredibly amusing, as the entire thing is just Krillin insisting that he's got this in the bag, only for life to prove him incredibly wrong. The highlight of this fight being Vampire Man biting Krillin's head, causing it to sprout blood like a tomato to Goku's amusement. Best fight comedy-wise is easily Puar and Upa versus Vampire Man, a very unconventional fight as both participants on the hero side are not fighters. They end up coming up with incredibly unique ways to fight back, which includes T-posing on him, which actually causes him to start tweaking. Now, the rest of this arc? I don't mind Yamcha versus the Invisible Man, but the only real memorable part of that to me is Bulma getting her top pulled off, which is certainly a thing that happens. Also, quick aside, but I noticed while editing it that there's a literal freeze frame of Bulma's, titties, and my brother is killing someone in the background. Can I record in peace, for the love of God? But everything after this until the final match is a complete blur. I'm just gonna skip everything until the final match because the final match is actually fire. It pits Goku against this mysterious masked fighter. Good choreography, an interesting mystery as the audience is meant to question who exactly this masked man who seems to know Goku is, and it's one of the more tense in the series as this is only now the 3rd time Goku's ever really struggled in a fight. Honestly, I might actually say it's the 2nd, because in the Jackie Chun fight, Goku would get knocked down, but he always got back up with a smile, always ready for more. While he isn't getting beaten nearly as bad as he did by Tao Pai Pai earlier in the arc, Goku finds himself struggling to keep up with this masked man who seems more than ready and more than familiar with his fighting style. Roshi notices this and feels that he might have known this guy from somewhere. By the end of the fight, Goku is all but defeated, and this masked man grabs Goku's tail, forgot to mention that's Goku's weakness, and starts throwing him around. So hard, in fact, he ends up ripping his tail straight off. Anyways, I'm gonna cut to the chase. This masked man is Grandpa Gohan, the man who raised Goku until he accidentally killed him, but, when he became a great ape. And when Goku realizes this, man, putting aside all issues I have with this arc, this hurts. But in a good way. Just seeing Goku brought to tears, overjoyed to see his father figure for the first time in so long, it's such a huge contrast to how Goku's usually portrayed. It's quite a sight. Goku this entire arc has been chasing down the last remaining memento of his grandfather, and at the end is forced to give it up for the greater good. But in pursuing the greater good, he's rewarded by actually getting the chance to reunite with his grandfather. Oh, you might have asked how this is even possible if Gohan is dead. Well, Baba can bring people back to life, from the world of the dead temporarily. That's cool. Also, she's Roshi's sister, I forgot to mention that. Anyways, I've got nothing more to say about this scene. After some more shenanigans involving the Peel-Off gang, Goku and Upa return to Karin's tower, revive Bora, an incredibly heartfelt scene. Goku manages to recover his grandfather's ball before it could scatter across the world. After this, as a request from Master Roshi, who Goku had long since surpassed in this arc, thus had nothing more to learn from him, Goku begins to walk the earth to further his skills before the next tournament. Meanwhile, Krillin resumes training under Roshi and Yamcha joins, and the three all resolve to meet again in 3 years for that tournament. The anime marches on with a short filler arc about Goku's journey across the world. I started to watch it, but I got bored and chose to skip it. So, yeah, sorry Motion Animate 3290. Maybe next time. So that's the Red Ribbon arc, a very ambitious arc that aims high but falls incredibly low in doing so. The main thing I commonly hear when people are praising this arc to high heaven are always in regards to its themes and its thematic value, but I always stress that as cool as themes are, they're nothing without an interesting and engaging narrative to back it. And that's where I feel this arc falls flat. A good story in stages, but one that consistently underdelivers and represents a low for the original Dragon Ball as a whole to me. I don't really know if this arc was at all pivotal in the growth of the popularity of Dragon Ball, but I can assume it probably was. More importantly though, the arc wrapped up the first half of Dragon Ball in a pretty neat bow, all things considered. However, despite Dragon Ball doing a lot better than it had been doing before, it was clear that Toriyama and his editor Torishima weren't quite satisfied with what had been done up to this point. Rounding out what was at this point several years of storytelling, Toriyama, now over a year of experience writing a much more serious, much more overarching narrative, found himself in a pretty interesting position. With all of the loose ends done, the story very subtly goes into a soft reboot, as previous loose ends have all been tied up, and the entire vibe of Dragon Ball is very abruptly shifted. With the previous success of the 21st Tenkaichi Budokai in mind, it just made a lot of sense to revisit the concept again for another story arc. But this time around, Toriyama made a couple of adjustments to the format to make it stand far apart from the previous Budokai. The biggest difference is something that, on paper at least, should be incredibly obvious, but isn't quite as obvious as you might think. As I discussed in my segment on the previous tournament arc, a vast majority of the fights in the 21st tournament were there to facilitate comedic situations, such as Ranfan stripping down and trying to win against a monk, Krillin fighting a Redditor, and Goku constantly powering through things through BS means. Even the more serious fights used comedy all throughout it to remind the audience what they were reading, which was, a comedy. Overall, I'd say the previous tournament arc's ratio of funny was about 85% out of 100. If I'm to assess this arc, that ratio would drop to a staggering 15%. There is no Krillin pulling out panties mid-match to outsmart his opponent. There is no mid-match breaks where the fighters explain the intricacies of their "we fought so fast nobody could see us" kung fu movie moment. There are no female characters stripping down to their underwear, unfortunately and fortunately IMO. Sure, there's a character inflating himself briefly and another character going full Haikyuu on their opponent mid-match, but moments like these are a rarity. And they aren't even given nearly as much focus as jokes from the previous tournament arc. Not only that, I'd say there's only 2 fights in the actual tournament bracket solely dedicated to the laughs. And really, 2 is being generous. One of these fights is comedic, but it feels that way by proxy, like it wasn't intentional the same way your Bacterian versus Krillin is. That's Goku versus Pamput, where Goku pretty much stands around while that cocky, hot-headed boxing celebrity superstar showboats and talks a big game only to get punched literally once and fold like a house of cards. This fight's existence is more so there to showcase Goku's post-time skip skills. The other match is between Jackie Chun and this Wolfman. Half of this fight is Jackie Chun just fucking with the guy. The other half, Jackie Chun using Krillin's head to hypnotize the Wolfman into thinking Krillin's big head is actually the moon. But other than that, that's literally it. After this, most of the fights are probably pretty straight, with the focus instead being on the main conflict of the arc instead of random comedic gags. The arc structure is actually similar to the prior tournament arc when you boil it all down. On one hand, you have Goku, our always lovely protagonist, who is gunning for first place. He's portrayed as a force of nature, practically untouchable compared to those around him, no matter how gifted or how much they've trained in the craft. Then you have another character on the side who, on one hand, you can interpret as an antagonistic force. On the other hand, they also act as our POV for the story. The story, very subtly, is about their path to victory. In the 21st Tenkaichi Budokai, that was Master Roshi under the alias of Jackie Chun. In the 22nd Tenkaichi Budokai, that role goes to Ten Shinhan, also known as Tien. The main conflict of the 22nd Tenkaichi Budokai is about the rivalry between the Turtle School and the Crane School, led by Roshi's old rival, the Crane Hermit, also known as Master Shen. The Crane School is made up of Ten Shinhan, an asshole with 3 eyes, and Chaozu, or Chaozu, an asshole who can't count. I find it fascinating how Toriyama always has to introduce new characters in pairs because it just seems so unnecessary when in cases like Ten and Chaozu, it's clear one is significantly more relevant than the other. Though I suppose the reason we have a duet here and not just Ten by himself is because initially this pair is to act as foils for Yamcha and Krillin, as they're the only turtle students around when the Crane frauds make their debut. During the first half of the tournament, this arc's main narrative is pretty clear-cut. Crane School versus Turtle School. It's all about the Turtle School students stuffing the mouth of these arrogant know-nothings, and of course, that's going to involve besting them. But As this arc goes along, the main focus shifts away from our simple our team versus their team one and towards something a little different. During the first match with Yamcha, Yamcha gets Yamcha'd and loses, leaving beating Tien responsibilities up to Krillin and Goku, but really just Goku. But then Tien fights Jackie Chun, the leader of the Turtle Hermit unit, and he tries to instill upon him the ideals of the Turtle School. Once you get to that fight, it becomes clear that this arc is really about Tien finding himself in the face of his upbringing, just like Jackie Chun in the previous tournament arc, making him a stand-in for the protagonist of the story arc, causing Tien to slowly start to doubt his own perspective on fighting, especially in the face of Goku, who, like in the previous tournament, is just tearing up the place. Really, when you boil it all down, this arc has a pretty basic plot. I am skimming over some of the details. For example, initially, Tien is very dismissive of Goku. He and Shen later want him dead after learning he was responsible for Tao Pai Pai's murder, because as it turns out, Tao Pai Pai was Shen's little brother. Now, I feel this arc's biggest strength is in its tournament fights. I did a lot of glazing for the last tournament arc's fights, but I feel those were impressive because it was the first time we'd really seen a whole bunch of them in such quick succession from Toriyama. They were good, but compared to what was to come, they otherwise wouldn't even register because, well, of all the arcs so far, this has the best fights. They're all very straightforward, focused to the point, and incredibly flashy. I haven't actually sat down and talked about any of the animation studios responsible for the show at all yet, and this has to do with the fact that I feel the various talents behind the franchise don't really start making themselves known until Dragon Ball Z gets underway. But slowly but surely, the cracks are starting to reveal that Dragon Ball has a team of hungry, talented animators ready to showcase their skills. Jackie Chun versus Tien, Goku versus Krillin, and of course, Goku versus Tien all cement themselves as some of the best fights in Dragon Ball. In fact, let me go over them and I'll provide further commentary for my thoughts and opinions on this arc. The first major confrontation is between Yamcha and Ten Shinhan. Yamcha, since its inception, has been clearly playing the role of the guy who shows up just to lose in order to show how powerful the villain is, and this fight is no different. To be fair, he does start out pretty even, Tien even noting that he's actually a little nervous because he wasn't expecting Yamcha to be this strong, but pretty quickly into the fight, he reveals he hasn't used most of his power and he quickly does away with Yamcha. Poor dolt. At the very least, the anime staff used the fight to shove in Yamcha's little insert song, Wolf Hurricane. It's pretty catchy. A shame that the Western Dragon Ball fandom is pretty ignorant to the amount of good insert songs this entire series has had, aside from Spirit vs. Spirit, Solid State Scouter, Battle Point Unlimited, and Ultimate Battle. Anyways, I think it's worth noting that this broken leg Yamcha receives puts him out of commission for the rest of this arc, and he isn't seen physically again until the arc's already over. This also goes for all the side characters who came to watch the tournament, as they all leave to join Yamcha at the hospital. A shame, but it's not like they were going to be doing too much. But I still do think Toriyama was leaving a lot of fun character interactions on the cutting room floor by doing this. Interestingly enough, unlike all the other tournament arcs, the anime version of the 22nd Tenkaichi Budokai takes place over a period of several days. This was a decision that was so clearly made so they could bring all the other side characters back into the fold as soon as possible in order to facilitate more cutaway gags. At least that's my assumption. But it makes a lot of sense given randomly cutting away from fight scenes to characters observing and discussing the fight is a common practice amongst shonen anime that were released on a weekly basis in order to fill up the runtime and pad out episodes. I feel in most instances this is like one of my least favorite shonen tropes out there, as it often takes away from the fight scenes, but believe it or not, I think OG Dragon Ball is one of the few that can get away with doing something like this. I think the anime version really showcases the potential versatility of the side cast with the various humorous cutaway gags we see throughout the anime version of the tournament. Bulma getting into constant arguments with Master Shen, Bulma punching the shit out of Oolong unintentionally deserved after what he did in the first arc, and literally anything Launch does. Launch really comes into her own during this arc. In contrast to previous arcs, she's most commonly seen in her bad blonde form as opposed to her good blue form, and it seems that whereas before the blonde Launch was 100% hostile towards the main cast, it seems that during the time skip she's mellowed out towards them. I think what makes her so golden is that she sits in such stark contrast to the overly jovial, goofy, and for the most part at least, upbeat characters, as she's written to be this delinquent asshole who is kind of off doing her own thing but just so happens to know them. Like early on when the group wants to get good seats for the fights, her solution is to start shooting up the place. Or when the manager of one of Goku's fighters attempts to kidnap Goku, Launch gives chase purely because she'd bought him ice cream. And really, all of her banter with the squad during cutaway gags are gold. It's common knowledge that once we get into the Z portion of Dragon Ball, Launch is a casualty of the switch to the more serious narratives, as she's entirely written out. I found that in more hardcore sectors of the Dragon Ball fandom, in contrast to other parts of it who will lament her disappearance from the story as a tragedy, it's welcome and just seen as an inevitability, as Launch's whole character was often written as a one-note gag that overstayed its welcome by the end of the first half of Dragon Ball. But the little snippets Toriyama writes for her, and especially the stuff Toei does, really proves that this didn't have to be the case. If Dragon Ball Super or Daima or Heroes or whatever the fuck is going to do anything in the future, they could at least bring Launch back for me, because honestly, after finishing Dragon Ball, I think she might just be one of my favorite characters in the show, but I'll get back to this subject later. Krillin and Chaozu end up going at it, and while Krillin is at a huge disadvantage due to his inability to do things Chaozu can do, such as fly, use telekinesis, and most importantly turn himself into a human drill, Chaozu is also at a disadvantage due to his inability not to stop what he's doing and count with his fingers if asked a basic math question.
He just like me for real.
Anyways, Krillin wins via math. And I hate to admit it, but if we were ever to come to blows, I feel like strength-wise, I could match Krillin pretty easily. He's a fucking bitch. But the math thing makes him basically untouchable. Like, math is like my only weakness. That being said, in our next match, we have Jackie Chun versus Ten Shinhan in our first semifinals match, and I have to say, this is when the tournament goes from already a pretty good step in the right direction, taking some nice hard lessons from the previous one, into absolutely great tier territory. This fight is all about Roshi in disguise trying to reach out to Tien and show him the ways of the turtle teachings. Roshi can very well see that behind Tien's attitude problems, there is a very skilled martial artist, and one who strives to be the very best at what he does. While Tien denies Roshi's teachings, even claiming he's training himself to be an assassin like Tao Pai Pai, Roshi constantly pushes against this. Ignoring the thematic element to the fight, the action in this fight is immediately put up there as one of the best fight sequences in the entire show so far. There are so many really cool set pieces from Roshi's after images, to Tien revealing the Taiyo Ken or solar flare technique, which blinds everyone in the vicinity. He uses this to land a monstrous blow on Roshi, which I'm genuinely surprised he survived. There are so many insanely cool and memorable set pieces. The choreography is firing on all cylinders, and man, that surprise ending. Roshi has been all about proving to the next generation that they always need to be ready, because there will always be stronger men out there for them to fight. And so they should never quit training and building themselves up. That martial arts isn't about being the strongest, it's about bettering yourself and becoming stronger. But seeing the passion of kids like Tien and his own students, especially Goku, Roshi eliminates himself, recognizing that his services are no longer needed. The next generation of warriors doesn't need someone like him to motivate them. The likes of Goku, Tien, Krillin, and Yamcha are all stepping up to the plate, and will never step down out of some sense of satisfaction. Plus, it was clear that Goku had already surpassed him, Tien was stronger than him, and Yamcha and Krillin would inevitably be too. Roshi exits stage right, stepping aside for the future. And even after all this is done, once Krillin and Goku's fight is underway, he makes sure to talk to Tien, who, mid-fight, learned of his secret identity, and discuss what he was trying to get across with him further. You know, in spite of all of the issues some people may have with Roshi's character, and how in many areas he wouldn't fly today, Roshi proves that he's an incredibly mature, well-meaning teacher. Genuinely, he has been the heart and soul of this narrative for two of its strongest arcs. And if it wasn't for the arc that was going to come next, I'd say this whole sequence perfectly rounds out his character. I can at least say all of this made Roshi go from a character I respected to honestly really liked. Wish we got more of this Roshi all the time after Z starts, because I feel most people aren't familiar with this fatherly, wise old sage version of Roshi. Though thankfully Super did a lot of work to bring this back, which, for all the shit I've given Super, that I'm grateful for. Now, Goku versus Krillin. Man, what a match. This is a fight that exists purely to showcase the sheer difference in skill and power between Goku and Krillin, but, like, damn man, this match is so fun. You can tell throughout the entire thing, this is just two bros being bros, having an absolute blast, having this opportunity to face each other. Bulma and the rest of the squad are off on the sides cheering them on the entire time, honestly cheering harder than they do for any of the other matches, which includes the finals, mind you. The sun is setting off in the distance, and the whole time the Tenkaichi Budokai theme from the previous tournament is blaring in the background. This is a fight that doesn't really need to be intricate. And it certainly isn't when compared to most of the fights surrounding this one, but in spite of that, I had this huge grin on my face while watching it. It's like I was in the stands with the side characters, cheering on these friends I've known for years who were just having a blast fighting each other. It really showcases how good Toriyama has been at making me love this cast of characters, because this fight means nothing in the grand scheme of things, yet I was fully absorbed in it, in spite of that. It helps that, again, it has the best fight choreography we've seen up to this point. Think Jackie Chun versus Goku's ending, but spread across the entire fight. At this point in the series, one of the best studios working on the show has to be Last House, who are one of the many studios Toei has outsourced animation responsibilities to. In particular, shout out to the sequence by Shida Naotoshi, which flows incredibly well and is genuinely the single best part of the fight IMO. Shida would later go on to become one of Toei's top animators, handling some of the most important scenes in several of their anime long after Dragon Ball, but this was one of his first major cuts of animation. It's crazy, right? Because in terms of story, this match only exists to showcase the difference in scale of power between Goku and Krillin. It really has no meaning outside of that. And particularly in the anime, it could have been just a couple minutes just to get straight to the point, which is that Goku has advanced so much in the past 3 years that he's more than a match for Tien. And yet I found myself getting super into it despite that, not because I desperately necessarily wanted to see either of my boys win the thing, but because the whole time you can tell there's an element of fun to it. I also feel the solid character writing of this arc also plays a part in this too. By the time this video comes out, I've probably already released my FMA video on the subject, but to me, effective character writing is just letting the characters be themselves, not focusing so much on their character development or backstory, but just writing people. It's hard to really explain, as I feel this phenomenon isn't really talked about much within the anime community or really in writing in general, but I certainly feel it played a part in me enjoying this fight. Now that being said, I've been talking a lot about how this fight is all about showcasing Goku's skill, but it doesn't quite start out like that. In fact, when the fight starts, emphasis is placed on how pretty even these two fighters are. They're trading blows back and forth, the characters and the audience have a hard time telling who was stronger of the two. However, as the fight goes on, it's clear that Goku is much stronger. Krillin ends up on the back foot and realizes that this is the case, so understanding he can't beat Goku in head-to-head combat, he chooses to try and outsmart his dumbass best friend. He distracts Goku by firing a Kamehameha at him, which Goku advises Krillin against, pointing out that he'll just block it, which he does. I'm mentioning this because goddamn is that cold as fuck. Dude blocked a Kamehameha with one hand, didn't even break a sweat. Anyways, Krillin uses this as an opportunity to grab Goku's tail, demobilizing him pretty much instantly upon being touched there. Krillin appears to have won the match with this cheap move, but it turns out, no. Goku trained his tail during the 3 years he was out and about, and then he proceeded to vanish before Krillin's eyes. Once he's confused Krillin in the crowd enough, he pops back into existence and jump scares Krillin out of the ring, decisively winning their battle. Now that being said, Tien, who was fresh off his conversation with Roshi, points out how Goku didn't actually scare him out of the ring. In the second in between Goku reappearing and Krillin falling out of the ring, Goku hits a series of blink or not you'll still fucking miss it attacks that results in Krillin getting knocked out of the ring. Now with that fight being good and over with, the stage is finally set for the finals. It's gonna be Goku versus Tien, Turtle versus Crane, and going into this, you can see that story is actually being set up in a manner similar to the previous tournament arc. Goku up to this point has been the favorite to take down the arrogant asshole Ten Shinhan, but after his match with Roshi, that arrogance has already had a hole punch through it. Now Ten is kind of questioning his outlook on martial arts. While Goku isn't the antagonist in this scenario, this fight Ten Shinhan is having being more man versus self after all, he is a tool for this larger narrative, and it ends up making Ten feel a bit more like the protagonist of this coming segment, as he has the most to gain and the most to lose from this conflict. But he swears he won't let it bother him in the coming fight, and with that, the next day comes and the fight is on. And immediately, this fight starts out strong. I've got to shout out the team responsible for this episode. The camera angles are immediately very eye-catching, particularly this one of Goku dashing at Tien that's shot from underneath him. And especially this phenomenal one of Goku doing this little flip out of the ground with the light rays reflecting off of the imaginary camera. That's an incredibly creative directorial choice, if I must say so. And in general, this opening sequence is just animated by Katsuyoshi Nakatsuru. It's drawn so incredibly well, and the animation on top of that is incredibly smooth, from Goku bouncing around the ring, this rotation shot of Tien, and finally Tien beating the absolute shit out of Goku against the wall. It's pretty often that when Dragon Ball fans try to convince fans of the franchise who have either avoided Dragon Ball or hesitant to start it, they'll share this fight sequence with them to change their mind. It's really that good. And the rest of this fight's pretty damn good too. Toriyama and Toei just really locked the fuck in for the last few tournament fights, and it really shows. So getting back to the story itself, both opponents showcase that each of them have a specific leg up on each other. Every time it appears Tien has the advantage, Goku gets back up and shows that in fact he's the one with the advantage. Then when it appears Goku has the upper hand, Tien finds some way to get around him. But eventually it appears Tien is the one with all the momentum, as he's able to very swiftly get some easy strikes on Goku. But it is because of how easy these strikes come, and Goku's confusion as to how he's getting hit so easily, that Tien realizes something is up. Turns out Master Shen has been forcing Chaozu to hold Goku in place for Tien to get some easy Ws. This absolutely infuriates Tien, who demands Chaozu stop interfering with the fight. As Chaozu is a good friend, he listens, but Shen isn't having any of it and demands Chaozu use his powers to kill Goku instead. Tien rejects his demand, so now Master Shen demands Chaozu kill Goku and Tien, but Chaozu rejects his demand as well, so Master Shen decides to take matters into his own hand and kill all three. But right as things appear to get really bad, Master Roshi fires off a Kamehameha at him, flinging him out of the plot entirely. With that, Tien now has no longer any restraints. Yeah, I know that's a very abridged way of putting, the conclusion to Tien's story here. I must say, it is a pretty good, character arc and just story arc in general, especially so for, what we've seen so far in Dragon Ball. I just do feel it is a little rushed. I get that this was probably the first time Toriyama really tried something like this, but the whole change from I'm an arrogant asshole to, you know what, I'm an honorable fighter, I should start acting like one, is a bit sudden, and I do feel it is a bit sudden in this fight too. Anyways, with that, the momentum of the fight continues as it had previously been. You know, now that I think about it, this fight does have a lot of interesting set pieces. I think my favorite being when Goku counters Tien's solar flare technique by just grabbing Roshi's sunglasses. Because as it turns out, you know, having sunglasses on completely mitigates the effects of the solar flare technique. Who would have thought? Later on, Tien goes out and pulls this multi-arm attack, which seems to have Goku against the ropes, only for Goku to go, "That's a cool technique, let me try it out." And he mimics it pretty easily, I think, by creating after images of his arms. In general, I noticed that compared to the previous fight between Goku and Krillin, this fight's focus is much more on set pieces and specific techniques. I suppose this may be a result of perhaps the manga version of the previous fight not being too detailed, so the Toei staff had to fill in the blanks. Now that I think about it, that does make me wonder which of the fights I prefer. The animation and choreography in the previous fight was more than enough to carry it in my eyes, but at the same time the narrative being told in this fight is super intriguing. Tien's journey to accepting that he doesn't really want to be the evil assassin he was raised to be, respecting Goku, was something I found really interesting. Sure, it's not the most in-depth with itself. I think Toriyama could have done a couple things to make it more engaging and more satisfying. I feel some of the elements for the emotional narrative happen a bit too suddenly, but I enjoyed what I saw in this. Of course, I'm not even done relaying the events of the fight yet though, so I should probably do that first. So Tien, seeing the writing on the wall with how Goku and him are just way too evenly matched, decides he's going to take advantage of one of the few abilities he has that Goku can't match. See, I mentioned this in passing when discussing the fight between Chaozu and Krillin, but both Tien and Chaozu, yeah, they could fucking fly. Flight becomes such an important part of these stories in the future, and the characters can already jump up incredibly high and basically float up there forever thanks to the power of anime bullshit, so it's kinda surprising to think about how we're only now just seeing flight become an important element in this narrative. Anyways, Tien's plan is to destroy the ring, basically guaranteeing Goku will ring out. To do this, he employs a forbidden technique, the Ki-Ko-Ho, or Tri-Beam. It's a technique so powerful it'll sap some of Tien's life force away, which is exactly why it becomes his only technique in Dragon Ball Z and Super. As you can guess, this move is nothing to sneeze at. It does indeed destroy the ring, but after the dust settles, everyone realizes that Goku was nowhere to be seen. Goku did suggest he'd block or tank the technique, so, guess he's dead? Nah, turns out Goku chose to jump over it last minute and is now in the sky. Tien joins him up there, and it's clear now Goku is practically out of energy. All that Tien has to do is sit there and, well, wait for gravity to do its job and somehow not kill Goku in the process. I get he's superhuman, but it's kind of surprising how little an effect of gravity will have on his shins. Either way, Goku actually has just enough strength to pull off a Kamehameha, but instead of firing it at Ten, he fires it away from Ten, sending him at Ten. This catches Ten off guard, and Goku is able to land a decisive hit against him. A decisive hit that sends both fighters flying back towards the earth below. Goku manages to use his remaining strength to at least guarantee he'll hit the floor last. So with everything said and done, it looks like Goku's all set to make up for his defeat in the previous tournament.
What the fuck, y'all? God damn! God damn! God damn!
Goku may be the main character of this anime, but in truth this wasn't his fight to win. Tien was the one who needed this win more than him to really solidify his change in character, to prove that turning his back on the Crane Hermit's teaching was for the better. And man, that scene of the crowd celebrating both fighters for an absolutely phenomenal matchup, with Yamcha bringing everyone together in order to applaud both fighters. I don't even know what I should say about it. I really can't do this segment any justice, but I will say, you know, it almost got me, you know. I guess to me, it felt like the perfect culmination of this fight. Sure, Goku didn't win, but his ideas did. So in a way, it kind of felt like both of them won this round. With the tournament now over, the squad, now joined by Chaozu and Tien, join together and head out to get something to eat like at the end of the last tournament. And with that, the 22nd Tenkaichi Budokai comes to a close. And man, what an arc. I really don't want to blow my load here now instead of at the end of the video when I intend to give my final overall thoughts, but this is honestly my favorite arc in the OG Dragon Ball. I think it features the most engaging narrative and capitalizes on that narrative the best with the best character interactions and the best fight scenes. Don't get me wrong, the next tournament is a pretty close second, but when we get there, you'll see why I prefer this one over that one. Personally, I think this arc showcases that Toriyama had really learned the right lessons from the previous two arcs. He'd already been experimenting with more overarching storytelling as opposed to the more episodic, jovial stuff from the first two, and he put his understanding to good use in this arc. Also, his ability to pen amazing fight scenes has definitely gone up. I think most importantly, Toriyama made a more subtle shift away from the overly jovial comedic tone of prior arcs, focusing his attention on a more focused overarching narrative. I very much feel the need to make it clear that during this arc, Dragon Ball wasn't done being comedic. After all, the Tien fight, despite how serious it might have come off, still had the moment where Tien goes full Haikyuu boy on Goku, hitting him around like a volleyball, literally. You could tell based on stuff like that Dragon Ball wasn't quite done being comedic just yet. But nonetheless, when you really sit down and look at the priorities and the attention and focus this arc had towards more serious storytelling, it was clear that Toriyama was, kind of subtly up to something. Maybe it was a desire to match the success of fellow shonen such as Fist of the North Star, or just because either or both Toriyama or Torishima just wanted to do something a little different with the story. But Dragon Ball was starting to shift its priorities as a narrative. It hadn't shedded its comedic roots quite yet. The tournament still chose to feature many joke matches, and even the more serious ones featured incredibly out-of-pocket comedic moments to retain a bit of that Dragon Ball brevity. But this wasn't to last. This arc made it clear that Toriyama was about to make a change. All that was left was for Toriyama to pull the trigger.
どうしたんだク